Chapter 4. God Bless Us Everyone. Awakening in the middle of a deep sleep and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge almost hadn't noticed the sound of the church bells that had just rung 1. He hoped he might be better prepared for the second of the 3 spirits, and so he pulled at his bed curtains. Now, Scrooge was not normally a brave man, but his first 2 visitors had made him ready for any ghost. He felt. Nothing between a baby and a rhinoceros would have surprised him. If he was prepared for anything, he certainly was not prepared for nothing, so that when the bell struck 1 and nothing happened, Scrooge began to shake. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by, but nothing came. Was he dreaming, or had he been dreaming all along? All this time he lay on his bed, which seemed to shine with some sort of reddish light. Where was this light coming from? It took some time for Scrooge to realize that the source of this light came from his sitting room, and so he got up softly and walked slowly to the door in his slippers. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the door, a strange voice called out to him by his name and asked him to enter. He did as he was told. It was his own room, there was no doubt about that, but it had been transformed in a surprising way. The walls and ceiling were hung with living green, so that it looked like a perfect garden, from every part of which he could see berries shining in the calm light. The crisp leaves of mistletoe reflected back the light like many mirrors. A great fire went up the chimney, warming everything before it. Heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, chicken, strings of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, red-hot chestnuts, juicy oranges, and bowls of punch that made the room clouded with a delicious steam. And on the throne there sat comfortably a giant, glorious to see, and holding a torch from which shone a reddish light. "Come in," said the ghost. "Welcome, Ebenezer. Come in." Scrooge entered the room, but did not want to meet the spirit's eyes. "I am the ghost of Christmas Present," said the spirit. "Look at me." Scrooge did as he was told. It was clothed in one simple green coat with white fur. Its chest was bare. It was not wearing any shoes, and on its head it wore a wreath, shining with icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its kind face, its shining eyes, its open hand, its cheerful voice. "Touch my coat," said the ghost. Scrooge, knowing what was expected of him, did so, and held it tight. The mistletoe, red berries, turkeys, geese, chicken, meat, sausages, pies, puddings, fruit, and punch all suddenly disappeared. So did the room, the fire, the reddish light, the hour of night, and they stood in the city streets on the Christmas morning. Despite the cold, and it was very cold, people were making a rough, but not unpleasant, kind of music, removing the snow from the pavement in front of their houses. Carts were making deep marks in the snow, crisscrossing each other along the great streets. The sky was dark, and the smallest streets were full of snow, half melted and half frozen. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, and yet there was a cheerfulness in the air. Where was it coming from? It soon became obvious. The people who were lifting the snow were happy, calling out to one another from rooftops, and sometimes even throwing snowballs. As Scrooge and the spirit walked through the wintry streets of this pleasant neighbourhood, a true Christmas spirit was in the air. The grocers, The fruit sellers and even the butchers were still half open and smelt wonderful, especially the grocers, with special tea and coffee, fruits and nuts, its sticks of cinnamon and other spices, its French plums, and much, much more. Perhaps it was the generous nature of the good spirit that gave them direction, or perhaps it was his sympathy with all poor men. Whatever it was, they soon arrived at the four-roomed house of Scrooge's clerk, Bob Cratchit. And it was then that Scrooge saw what he had never seen before or thought possible, a family caught in the moment. They were not very well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof, and their clothes were old, nor was their house properly dressed with comfortable pieces of furniture. Another sign of their poverty came from the kitchen, where a goose was cooking instead of the usual Christmas turkey. But they were happy, grateful, and pleased with one another and the time they had together. Mrs. Cratchit was making the sauce. Their eldest son, Master Peter, was preparing the potatoes with great energy. A daughter, Miss Belinda, was sweetening up the apple sauce. Another, Miss Martha, was cleaning the cooker, and Bob himself took his youngest, Tiny Tim, beside him in a tiny corner at the table, which was neatly laid out for their Christmas dinner. As far as Scrooge could see, the only complaint that this family could have with life was that Tiny Tim carried a little crutch with him. The family sat down at the table and said prayers. This was followed by a pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the knife, prepared to cut the goose, and when she did, a sound of happiness was heard around the table. Even Tiny Tim weakly cried hurrah. When they had finished with their delicious dinner, the table was cleared, the floor swept, and the fire made up. They sat down by it, ready with a compote of fruit and some chestnuts. They lifted their mugs when Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us," which they all joined in. "God bless us, everyone," said Tiny Tim, the last of all, and the scene disappeared before Scrooge's eyes. Chapter 5. To Uncle Scrooge. Scrooge and the spirit found themselves on the streets again. By this time it was getting dark and snowing quite heavily, and as they walked along, the brightness of the fires in the kitchens and living rooms was wonderful. Christmas was in the air, there was no doubt about it. And now, without a word of warning from the ghost, they stood upon an empty field, where lots of stones were around. It looked like a graveyard for giants. Down in the west, the sun was going down fast, its light changing from golden yellow to red. A few moments later, it looked at this untouched view for a second like a silent eye, and going lower, lower, lower again, until darkness fell over the world like a cold blanket. "What place is this?" asked Scrooge. "A place where miners live who work in the earth," answered the spirit. "But they recognize me, see?" A light shone from the window of a hut, and quickly they moved towards it. Passing through the wall of mud and stone, they found a cheerful group of people sitting around a bright fire. An old man and woman, and their children, and their children's children, and another generation again, all dressed brightly in their holiday clothes. The old man was singing them a Christmas song. It had been a very old song even when he was a boy, and from time to time they all sang with him. It seemed as if they sang in time with the wind's own music outside. The spirit did not stay, but asked Scrooge to hold his coat, and high above the land flew. Where? Not to sea. To sea. They flew past ships, they flew past lighthouses, they flew past islands, but wherever they saw human life, Even on the seas, the story of Christmas was being told and retold. Every man either sang a Christmas carol or had a Christmas thought, or spoke quietly to his companion of some past Christmas day. At last they landed on land itself, and again, suddenly, Scrooge found himself in a country house he did not recognize. There was, however, something about the place which he recognized. "Ha ha!" laughed a voice he knew well. "Ha ha ha!" It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew. The room where they were in was bright, dry, and warm. Scrooge turned around and found the spirit standing by his side, he too smiling. Everybody, even those without bodies, felt the cheerfulness in the room. "Ha ha 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 ha! He said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live!" cried Scrooge's nephew. "He believed it too!" "How sad, Fred!" said Scrooge's niece, a little angry. She was pretty, very pretty too. Scrooge had never met his niece, had never found the time to visit, had never accepted his nephew's kind invitations. And now, seeing the good times he had missed, and the good times he was missing, Scrooge felt a deep pain in his heart. "He's a funny old man," said Scrooge's nephew. "That's the truth. And not as friendly as he could be, I feel." "I'm sure he's very rich, Fred," suggested Scrooge's niece. "At least you always tell me so." "But do you think that money helps him?" said Scrooge's nephew. "It is useless to him. He doesn't do any good with it. He doesn't even make his own life comfortable with it." "I have no patience with him," said Scrooge's niece. "Oh, I have," said Scrooge's nephew. "I am sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who really suffers from his greed? Who really suffers from his selfishness? He does, always." "What makes you think he cares?" asked Scrooge's niece. "Well, take his Christmas. He doesn't visit us, and he certainly doesn't visit anyone else. I believe that because of this he loses some very nice moments in life. I am also sure that his thoughts could never give him the friendship we all need, either in his cold office or in his dark rooms. I would like to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not, because I feel sorry for him. He may think Christmas a humbug, as he says, but I am sure that he can't stop thinking about it, especially if he sees me in a good mood year after year, and saying, 'Uncle Scrooge, how are you?'" "I suppose you're right," said Scrooge's niece. "Here is a glass to his health and happiness anyway," said Scrooge's nephew, raising a glass of warm wine for his uncle. "I hope that he may one day find the happiness that belongs to us all. To Uncle Scrooge." "Well, to Uncle Scrooge," she agreed, doing the same. "A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, wherever he is," said Scrooge's nephew. Scrooge suddenly had a strange feeling of warmth as he heard these words. Words of hope, words of love. If only he could thank them for their thoughts and for their toast. If the ghost had given him time. Instead, the whole scene disappeared before his very eyes, and Scrooge once again found himself travelling. They saw much more, the spirit and he, and travelled far too, but the end was always the same, happy. The spirit stood by sick beds, and they were cheerful, by hard-working men, and they were patient, by poverty, and it was rich. Wherever they went, love seemed greater than all life's worries put together. This truly was a world where love could rule, Scrooge thought, and win. Scrooge saw all this in only one night, but it seemed like forever. He noticed, too, that while he stayed the same, the spirit appeared to grow older, clearly older. "Are spirits' lives so short?" asked Scrooge. "My life upon this world is very brief," replied the ghost. "It ends tonight." "Tonight?" cried Scrooge. "Tonight at midnight. Our time together is coming to an end." And almost as soon as the spirit had said this, the bell rang 12. They were back in Scrooge's bedroom now. Scrooge turned and looked for the ghost, but did not see him. Instead, as the last bell stopped ringing, he remembered Marley's words, and, lifting his eyes, saw a dark figure coming, like a fog along the ground towards him. Chapter 6. The Last of the Spirits. The ghost slowly came towards Scrooge. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down and knelt by it. The air around seemed full of unhappiness. It was wearing a deep black coat which hid its face, so that the only thing that Scrooge could see was his hand. He felt that the ghost was tall, but he was too afraid to look up. But that was all he knew, since the spirit neither spoke nor moved. Scrooge only felt fear in his heart. "Are you the ghost of Christmas future?" asked Scrooge. The spirit did not answer, but pointed with its hand. Although Scrooge was used to these visits by now, he was completely unprepared for the dark spirit. His legs grew weak and started shaking under him, and as he prepared to follow the spirit's hand, Scrooge found that he could hardly stand. "Ghost of the future," he cried, "I fear you more than any spirit I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be a different man from what I was, I am prepared to bear your company, and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?" It gave him no reply. The hand was pointing straight before him. The ghost moved away as it had come towards him. Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress, which took him up, as he thought, and carried him along. The city lay in front of them. They were, in fact, in the heart of it. Merchants hurried up and down the streets with the money in their pockets, and sometimes stopping to converse with others. The spirit flew on into a narrow street. Its finger pointed to two people meeting. Scrooge knew these men, and knew them well. They were men of business, very rich, and of great importance. "How are you?" said one. "How are you?" returned the other. "Well," said the first. "Old Scratch has finally died, hey?" "So I am told," returned the second. "Cold, isn't it?" "As usual in Christmas time. You're not a skater, I suppose, are you?" No, much too busy for that. Good morning." Not another word. That was their meeting, their conversation, and their parting. Not knowing what to think about this conversation, Scrooge turned towards the spirit, and all he was faced with was an outstretched hand pointing in another direction. This time into a poor part of town. It was Camden Town, and it had changed since Scrooge knew it. The ways now were dirty, the shops and houses falling down, the people half naked, drunken, ugly. The whole quarter smelt of crime, of dirt, and unhappiness. The sad ghost and Scrooge walked on till they reached the house of Bob Cratchit, Scrooge's clerk. Scrooge felt as though he had just visited his clerk's house, but this time seemed very different. The happiness and laughter that once filled the house had changed to bitter unhappiness. This was the scene that met Scrooge's eyes. In a corner sat Bob Cratchit crying like a child, with two of his own children sitting beside him. Mrs. Cratchit holding one of them, trying hard to kiss away her husband's tears. There were no words of warmth, and there were no voices of hope. This awful vision was made more painful by the complete stillness in the scene. Nothing and nobody moved. Scrooge saw why his clerk's family was so unhappy. In the corner of the room stood an empty chair with a small crutch leaning next to it. Tiny Tim, the joy of this family, had been taken from them. "Spirit," said Scrooge, tears beginning to fill his eyes, "why has the child died?" The ghost said nothing. The scene had changed again, and this time they were facing an entrance gate to some overgrown churchyard. The iron gate made a metallic noise as the spirit moved through it. Scrooge stood still and could not follow the spirit. A deathly fear had taken hold of him. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. Scrooge waited, his legs going dead under him. The finger pointed from the grave to him and back again. "No, spirit, I beg you," said Scrooge. Still the finger was there. Scrooge slowly walked towards it, shaking, and following the finger, read on the stone of the lonely grave the name Ebenezer Scrooge, R.I.P. "No, spirit! Oh, no! No!" "Spirit!" he cried, holding his coat. "Hear me! I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I was. I will honour Christmas in my heart, and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall live within me. I will not forget the lessons they teach. Oh, tell me I may clean away the writing on this stone." In his pain he tried to catch the spirit's hand. The spirit freed itself as soon as Scrooge moved towards it. Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his future changed, he saw that the spirit's hood and coat became smaller before him, until it fell down on a bed. Chapter 7. The End of It. Yes, and the bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to change his wrong ways. "I will live in the past, the present, and the future," Scrooge repeated as he was getting out of bed. "The spirits of all three shall live within me. Oh, Jacob Marley, God bless heaven and Christmas time for this. I swear it on my knees, old Jacob, on my knees." He was so happy and so shining with good intentions that the tears on his cheeks were now tears of joy. For the first time in a very long time, he looked to the future with hope in his heart. "I don't know what to do," cried Scrooge, laughing and crying in the same breath. "I am light as a feather. I am happy as an angel. I am merry as a schoolboy. A Merry Christmas to everybody. A Happy New Year to all the world." And he laughed and laughed. It really was a great laugh. "I don't know what day of the month it is," said Scrooge. "I don't know how long I've been with the spirits. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. Oh, never mind, I don't care. I'd rather be a baby." And then he heard the church bells. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog. Clear, bright, cold fresh air. Merry bells. Oh, glorious, glorious. "What's today?" cried Scrooge, calling down to a boy. "Eh?" returned the boy. "Why, Christmas Day, sir." "It's Christmas Day," said Scrooge to himself. "I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything they like. Of course they can. Hello, my fine boy." "Hello, sir," replied the boy. "Do you know the butcher's in the next street at the corner?" Scrooge asked. "Of course I do, sir." "An intelligent boy," said Scrooge. "Do you know if they have the prize turkey that was hanging up there?" "What? The one as big as me?" returned the boy. "What a nice boy," said Scrooge. "It's a pleasure to talk to him." "Yes, my boy." "I believe it's hanging there now," replied the boy. "It is?" said Scrooge. "Go and buy it." "Excuse me?" said the boy. "I mean it," said Scrooge. "Go and buy it, and tell them to bring it here. Come back with the man, and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes, and I'll give you half a crown." The boy was running like a shot. "I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's," whispered Scrooge, rubbing his hands and laughing. Scrooge quickly got dressed and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the boy, butcher, and turkey. As he stood there waiting, the knocker caught his eye. "I shall love it as long as I live," cried Scrooge, patting it with his hand. "It's a wonderful knocker. Ah, here's the turkey. Hello, Merry Christmas!" And he paid for it all with a smile, and patted the boy on the head. "A Merry Christmas to you," repeated Scrooge, "and a Happy New Year." Scrooge left his house and walked down the street, dancing merrily along the snow-white streets. Wherever he went, it looked as if a new world had been born, where people greeted each other, smiled, and laughed out loud. He went to church and walked about some more, watching people hurrying along. He patted children on the head. He talked to the beggars and to the homeless. He looked into the kitchens of houses and up at the windows, and found that everything could give him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything for that matter, could bring him such happiness. In the afternoon he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. And he certainly surprised him, and his wife, and their friends. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful happiness. Scrooge enjoyed himself so much that he hoped Christmas would never end. But he was early at the office the next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That was his plan. And he did it. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 15:15. No Bob. He was exactly 18.5 minutes late. Scrooge sat with his door wide open so that he might see his clerk come into the office. "Hello," said Scrooge in his angry voice. "What time do you think this is?" "I am very sorry, sir," said Bob with fear in his voice. "You are?" repeated Scrooge. "Come here, sir, if you please." "It's only once a year, sir," begged Bob. "It will never happen again, sir. Please." "Well, let me tell you what I am going to do," said Scrooge, watching Bob tremble with fear. I'm going to raise your salary." Bob did not know what to think. He just stood there with his mouth open, not able to move a finger. "A Merry Christmas, Bob," said Scrooge, as he hugged him. "A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good man, than I have ever given you. I'll raise your salary. I'll try and help your family in any way I can. And we'll discuss your situation this afternoon over a bowl of Christmas soup, Bob." And Scrooge meant it too. He did it all, and a lot more. To Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became a friend to all, and his own heart laughed. May that truly be said of us, and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim once said, God bless us, everyone.